So, feel free to introduce yourself and what you're doing today.
My name is Paul Jacobs. I'm a lawyer, and I'm practicing with Hush Blackwell in Denver. I'm off counsel to the firm, and still focusing mainly on sports deals and stadium development, sales of teams, and that kind of thing.
And what were you doing at the time you decided to get involved in this effort?
Well, that was back in 1990, and I was a lawyer then at Home Robertson Owen, and decided I was going to. I knew that the National League was going to expand, and I had just sold my major client, just sold to a Hong Kong hotel company, and I was looking for something to do, and I decided I was going to do this baseball deal. That's how I originally got involved. We had a sports law group which I headed at Home Roberts, and I just decided one day I was going to do this deal.
So I assume the way you had gotten involved is that you were following the newspaper reporting about what was going on, and maybe talk radio, and had connections and friends.
Well, I was following it, and I knew the National League was going to expand, and then the governor called a meeting, and I believe that was August 16th, 1990, and that meeting was held at the Westin Hotel in downtown Denver, and I had no idea who was going to appear at that meeting or what the meeting was going to be about, other than the governor was promoting bringing Major League Baseball to Denver. So I did a little groundwork before that meeting, and got in touch with a guy named Mike Nicholas, who nobody ever remembers, but I convinced him to put up the $100,000 non-refundable application fee. I had it in my trust account when I went to that meeting, and I had met with Mr. Nicholas the night before. And he was a baseball junkie. I mean, he owned 2 minor league teams at the time. The Memphis Chicks, he was a principal owner, and I believe the Edmonton Trappers was the other one. And he had just sold his company, and was very hyped up about owning a Major League Baseball team. He's from New York. It was difficult to find somebody in Denver, and I'll explain that a little bit at the meeting, that really wanted to step up and be a lead. But he put the $100,000 in our trust account, and we went to the meeting. He did not attend that first meeting because I think he was closing the sale of his company, but I attended that meeting. And it was a room full of prominent Denver people, lawyers, and Governor Romer got up at the time and said, I don't know what I'm doing here, but I want to try to promote Major League Baseball. And he went around the table. He knew that the franchise fee was roughly $100 million, and he went around the table and said, okay, can I count on you, can I count on you? And a lot of good people in the room, including many of them who wound up in the original ownership group. But the mood was that, we'll do this as a civic thing, but we don't want to take the lead. I'll put in $3 million, I'll put in $5 million, and which was, checks in my mouth kind of thing at that stage of the game. But there was a lot of interest, but not at a level that was going to get a deal done, because we just needed somebody who was much stronger than that, or willing to commit more than that. And I figured out on the way through that the reason for that was a lot of people in that room didn't give us a chance. They thought it was a real long shot, and their principal concern, which some of them told me afterwards, was, look, I'll do it, and if I lose $3 to $5 million, that's okay, but I don't want to be out in front so that it hurts my other businesses. That was their principal concern. And the governor went around the room and said okay, and then said, I'm going to call another meeting. Well, no, what he said was, I'm going going to ask for proposals, written proposals, and we'll have another meeting, I think it was on the 23rd or 24th of August, in the same place. And I didn't say anything about the 100,000 at that point, but I knew I was out in front of everybody, in front of everybody else. And the next meeting, the next meeting came, and he did the same thing. And in the meantime, I had written a letter to him, telling him what was going on. It was him, and he had formed a committee of 3 businessmen that were out in front of this thing. Remember Dick Robinson and Trig Myron and Jim Baldwin, who at that time I think was the head of King Soopers here. And he formed that committee, and I wrote the letter and delivered it, hand-delivered it, I remember the night before that meeting, to each of the 3. And when the second meeting came at the Westin, the governor went around the room and did the same thing. And in the middle, he just said, "Time out." And he grabbed me, and he took me into a small kitchen that was off of this suite that we were in at the Westin. And he said, "Look," and this is, I think, a quote. He said, "Look, I have no business doing what I'm doing. I'm the governor of the state of Colorado. Why I'm doing this, I don't know." He said, "Do you have the 100,000 in the trust account?" And I said, "I do, Governor." And he said, "All right, I'm going out there and I'm going to announce to this group that you know, you," and by that time I had gotten Steve Earhart involved as well, "that you guys are going to lead the effort to bring baseball to Colorado, and then I'm going to get the hell out of here." And that's exactly what he did. And the place went bonkers when he did that, because everybody said, "Well, wait a minute, why'd you pick them? You know, we can do this deal." All of a sudden, everybody could do the deal. So I figured that the smartest thing for me to do was to get the hell out of there too. So I said, "Look, the governor just appointed me. As far as I'm concerned, this meeting's over. Anybody who's really interested, my office tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock, and we'll see who shows up." And that's what happened at that meeting. And the next morning, we had a meeting at my office at 8 o'clock, and a bunch of people showed up, including Jerry McMorris, and I don't think Charlie Monfort was there, but I knew he was committed. No, he was not committed at that point. McMorris was there, but the Monforts were not involved at that point. I take that back. And some other folks were there, and we knew that the application had to be done by the Tuesday after Labor Day. This is the 23rd of August, and we got a week to get an application put together. And we didn't, you know, I didn't even have a copy of the application yet. I didn't even know what it required. And we went from there. I got a copy of the application. We put it together within a week, which was a monumental task, because it isn't just, you know, who are you? It was demographics. It was, you know, economics. It was, you know, community support. It was all kinds of stuff. And I kind of decided at that point that, look, it doesn't make any sense to try to puff this thing, that I'm just going to be honest. I knew, what I did know was it was going to be a year before they made the decision, or almost a year before they made the decision, which later came in July of '91. And I said, this is a process. We're going to see how we build this thing and whether we can get there or not. I had no idea. But we put it together, and I also decided to, and Nicholas was the only one involved at this point in time. I also decided to take the application to New York myself and go into the league and talk to some people. And I did that the Tuesday after Labor Day. And I got an appointment with Phyllis Collins, who was the assistant or deputy you know, president or something of the National League. She worked for Bill White. She was the number 2. She was the highest ranking woman in baseball, and she worked for Bill. And I got an appointment with her at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I wanted to wait till later in the day to see who else had submitted applications. So I went to her office and I could see them all piled up there. And as it turned out, there were 18 groups from 10 different cities that had submitted applications. And it was the end of her day, and we sat down and had a 2-hour conversation. And we are still friends today. I talk to her every few months. She lives in Atlanta, and established a very good relationship with Phyllis. And what she told me was that she thought she had all of the ones that were going to come in, including mine. And she said, look, we're probably going to have meetings after after I think the Hall of Fame game or something that they were going to in late in September, and that the first interview would be sometime in October. So I thought I had a little breathing room. But we had a great conversation. I met Bill White at that time as well. And I went to sleep at a hotel that night because I was so tired. I didn't want to come home. I just went to sleep for 24 hours. Came home the next day, late the next day. And when I got into Denver, there was a telegram or some sort of communication from her saying, our interview was September 18th. Well, this was like the 6th or the 5th, so it wasn't in October. We had no time to prepare, and it was going to be difficult to get ready for that meeting. I don't know what changed in their minds, but we were difficult. By this time, I was getting a little nervous about Mr. Nicholas, because every time I asked him how much he was going to contribute to this deal and how much money he really had, he danced a little bit. And in my gut, I knew that I had to bring somebody else in. And at that time, Steve Earhart was the president. He was running a 6'5" and under basketball league for Mickey Monis. And he said, well, why don't we call Mickey? I didn't know these guys from Adam. And the first one I met was John Antonucci, who was Mickey's partner in a lot of business deals. Thankfully, not far more. And they were all hyped up about it. And they came to Denver, and I met them. And so before the 18th, we got them involved, along with Nicholas, because I was not confident that he was going to make the impression that I wanted him to make at that meeting. And I had no idea what the meeting was going to be like. It was, and I'll get into that a little bit too. In any event, they were all, and there had been an article in the Wall Street Journal about Mickey Monis, right before that meeting. And it was interesting because they quoted Sam Walton in that article, saying the only guy he's afraid of in the big box drugstore business was Mickey Monis. So, and he had just gotten a $300 or $400 million loan from big banks in New York to expand the business. And I said, this is a real guy. You get on the front page of the Wall Street Journal, you're a real guy, right?
Real money.
Anyway, that story is way down the line. But so we hired a PR firm. I forget who we hired. It wasn't a Denver firm. It was a national firm, and we put together where we were, a presentation. And basically, we had nothing. I had nobody committed. We had no organization. We had some people who said this is what we're going to do, and but we had no organization at that point, no entity. All we had was the stadium vote and location, and those were our two biggest assets. Because I knew that it's such a logical stopping place when you're going from St. Louis or Chicago to the West Coast to play some games in Denver. So we got the instructions for the meeting, which was held September 18th, 1990, in New York, and we came to the meeting with a group that included me, Federico Pena, who I don't remember if he was still mayor at that time. He was still mayor at that time, but before the process ended, he was gone. And I think Wellington Webb was the new mayor. But in any event, Federico Pena, Monis and Antonucci, Steve Kurtz, who was doing our accounting work at that time, and I think that was about it. And we had a very basic slide presentation plus a leave behind. And we were told that there can't be more than 5 people. We had more than 5 people. I can't remember who else was there, but you couldn't bring more than 5 people in the room at the same time. It was going to be very structured. It was going to be an hour. And I had done I thought this was one of the key moments, to be honest with you. I didn't know what was going to happen in the room, but I researched the members who were on the committee, and it was Doug Danforth from Pittsburgh, I believe, and Bill Giles from Philadelphia, Fred Wilpon from the Mets, and maybe Giles wasn't there. There was a guy from the Houston Astros who had I can't think of his name right now, but he had previously owned the Colorado Rockies here, the hockey team, and he moved it. It was the New Jersey Devils, and he moved it to New Jersey. And I can't remember. He's passed away now, and he was one of the 3. Giles replaced him later on the committee when he bowed out because he was trying to sell the Houston club. But anyway, I had done research on all these guys, and one of the things that I picked up was that Mr. Danforth spent his early career working for either General Electric or General Motors in Mexico, and he spoke fluent Spanish. So I told Federico this. So Federico, being Federico, walks into the room and says something to Danforth in Spanish, and Danforth lit up like a Christmas tree. He was so thrilled to be able to talk back to Federico in Spanish. So he just said, why don't you just all come in? And he established the mood of the meeting right away. It was much more informal than it was intended to be, and I thought that icebreaker was very, very important. In any event, we had a good meeting. It was clear that Denver was a location that they liked, but they said, look, you guys are way behind. There are other people that have raised all kinds of money. The meeting right before us was Miami, and because I met in the elevator lobby who they came with, and it was Wayne Huizenga who was the guy, and at that time Wayne was pretty flush, I think. So and Don Johnson was there from Miami Vice, and I think the quarterback at the time was Greasy, and I mean they brought a lot of celebrities from Miami, and they had set up the room with like 10 TVs where they would flashing simultaneous messages, and they really spent. I heard they spent $500,000 on their presentation. We spent about 12 grand. That was about it. So, but one of the things that happened in that meeting, which one of the lawyers told me about, Bob Keel, who was at Wilkie Foreign, who at that time represented the league, told me that one of the members of the committee asked Mr. Huizenga, well, how are you going to pay for this? And he reached into his pocket and pulled out his checkbook, and he said, I'm just going to write you a check. And I knew at that time that Miami had a franchise. I knew right after that meeting, because when you get a guy that can do that, that's what they were looking for. They were looking for financial strength and stability in the ownership group, and Huizenga was the guy. So it was really impressive to everybody in the room. I heard about that shortly after the meeting. But anyway, there's 16 TVs or however many there were blew up in the middle of the presentation. Mine didn't blow up. Mine was pretty focused. So we had a good meeting, and we went back came back to Denver, and we were told that there would be a short list that would come out, I think, in February, and we made the short list. There were 5 cities that were selected: Buffalo, New York, Washington, D.C., Orlando, no, not Orlando, Tampa St. Pete, I think, was one. Denver, and who was the fifth one?
Well, that sounds like 5 to me. Buffalo, DC, Miami, Tampa, Denver.
And Denver. Those were the 5. Those were the 5. Yeah. Orlando wasn't a player. I got involved in Orlando after that, but Orlando wasn't a player at that time.
And Phoenix wasn't a player either, even though they had Gargiola.
No, they didn't get it. They were the next expansion 2 years later, I think, in '95. So we got the short list, and that was a big deal. And then I knew we had, at least we were in the game. We'd spent Mr. Nicholas's $100,000 and filed the application, but we were in the game. So you just want me to keep rambling on about what was...
Yeah, I think this is fabulous. Keep going with the story. I guess the expansion committee came in next, or
Yeah, so this is February of this was February, and we were still trying to raise money. I mean, we were trying to raise $100 million, and then we didn't know how we were going to operate because that was just to pay the league. That was not how do you set up your business, how do you go from 91 to 93 and pay people and set up a front office and do all of those things. That was a real challenge as well. But the next thing that happened that was of significance that I don't think is in that piece, and I got a call one day from Bill White, and Bill says, "I'm coming to Denver. I want to talk to you. I don't want anybody to know I'm here." I get a little emotional about this because this was my life for a year, and it was day and night all the time. He said, "I don't want anybody to know I'm here, but I need to talk to you." I said, "Okay." So I picked him up at the airport, and we drove to some restaurant in Globeville, I think. I mean, we were in the middle of nowhere. He didn't want to come downtown. He didn't want anybody to know where he was. And he said to me at that meeting, he said, "Look," he said, I don't have a vote on the committee." He said, "But I think Denver's the right spot." He said, "And here's what you need to do." He said, "And I will keep the playing field level." I didn't have any idea what that meant. Okay, I found out later what it meant. It meant politically. There was so much pressure being put on by senators and Congress people on Major League Baseball to go to some of these other cities. I'm not a political guy. I wasn't in tune with all of that. And Bill said, "I know you're not, and I'll manage that, but you've got to raise this amount of money, this amount of time, do these things," and he said, you'll have a good shot." He said, "And I'll be supportive." He said, "This meeting did not happen," and I took it that way, and I kept it confidential, and I was the only one that met with him, and I was the only one that ever talked to him. I mean, they, for whatever reason, when I said something, they knew I was telling them the truth. If I had it, I told them I had it. If I didn't have it, I said I don't have it, but I'll have it by this date. And I tried to build confidence that we were going to get to where we were going to go. That didn't happen in a lot of other places. During the course of this saga, I found out that the guy from Buffalo really didn't want it. That he owned the AAA team in Buffalo, Bisons or something like that, and was minting money at the AAA level, and didn't want to invest another $100 million, and it just wasn't the right time in this guy's life. I forget his name. I also found out that Washington had, like 100 partners in the deal, everybody for little amounts, and baseball wasn't happy with that either. They didn't want that. They wanted, they didn't mind some local limited partners, or participants, but what they didn't want is, to deal with a group that didn't have a strong leader. So there were 2 of them, and I knew Miami had one, so it was us or Tampa. Who was the 5th one? Yeah, and us or Tampa, right? And And I knew that there were a lot of people in baseball that were pushing for Tampa.
Hadn't Tampa already built a stadium?
That's the problem, yeah. Tampa built what they called the Suncoast Dome, which they're still playing in, I think. They were selected in '95. They built it because the White Sox said the White Sox were leveraging Tampa and Chicago at the time, and Reinsdorf, who was a very powerful guy, still is in Major League Baseball, had said that, you know, they might move to Tampa. So Tampa went out and built this thing, which, by the way, if you've ever been in it, it's an awful place to watch a baseball game. It's like being inside a video game to watch a baseball game. It's terrible. And it's in the wrong place. It was in St. Petersburg. And it was just, anyway, but there was a lot of pressure from the American League, and particularly Reinsdorf, to do Tampa. I'll get back to that in a while. So that was February. Short list, visit from Bill White, and then in March of '91, I think it was the 23rd or the 26th. March 26, 1991, we had the visitation, which I was told. Let me back up a step. The other significant thing that happened in February is we had a meeting on Valentine's Day in February with Coors, and we were having a meeting with Peter Coors to see what their participation might be. They had never wanted to take the lead. They had made that clear to us, but we needed something from Coors, and we didn't know at that point what we were going to get. So I woke up that morning, and there was an article in the newspaper by Woody Page. To this day, I have never met Woody Page. Okay, I think I said hello to him in a restaurant one time, but he didn't know who I am, and we've never really met. And the headline in the article, you can go back and look at it and find it. It said, "Coors must join baseball effort," or something like that, if we're going to get this thing. And I will tell you that this was not a planted story, but I knew when I read it that Mr. Coors was going to be really pissed, because here it is in the paper, and we have a meeting scheduled the same day. It was just too coincidental. So we went out there. It was me and Jerry McMorris and Antonucci. I don't think Mickey Monos was there at that meeting. And I was right. He was furious. You know, you guys went to the press. You're trying to press me into doing this thing. I'm not promising anything. I mean, it was not a good meeting. Okay. It was not a planted story. It was pure coincidence. At least to my knowledge, and I've talked to everybody, and I don't think anybody. But I said, "Oh, we got a problem now." Well, we had a follow-up meeting, and he went to the board, and we worked out an equity and a sponsorship deal with Coors, which included the right to name the ballpark. I'll talk about that in a little bit too, because that's an interesting story. In any event, we announced Coors' participation in some way within that time frame. And more important than the dollars that Coors was committing to both sponsorship and ownership was just the name Coors, because what the national press picked up is Coors backs Colorado baseball effort, and that was huge. That was huge because everybody knew the name Coors, and it didn't matter. I mean, they could have put in more money or less money. It wouldn't have mattered. Just the fact that they were there was very important.
Did you think that created any liability with Anheuser-Busch in terms of them having their name on a stadium and a team in St. Louis?
What do you mean liability?
That a competing beer company would also be in the baseball
Oh,
arena.
I think the competition between Coors and Anheuser-Busch was already at the highest level, and adding this onto it didn't really matter. I think it mattered from Coors' point of view, because then they could say it. you know, we're in the same league as Anheuser-Busch, but I don't think it elevated any competition or anything between them at all. So that was real important, and at about the same time, we finished what I called the MOLT, the Memorandum of Lease Terms, with the Stadium District, which was a very favorable deal for the team. The way I always looked at this was, look, this is one of the, I call this one of the first public-private partnerships, before people started calling them public-private partnership. And the partnership was, the private sector would put up the $100 million for the team, and the public would put up the money for the stadium. And we had the stadium vote, and the bonds had already been passed back in August, right before the initial meetings, and that's why the governor was confident that we could get an ownership group. So I always viewed it as a public-private partnership, and that's how this deal was going to get done. So we had all of that, and that was, and we had crafted this memorandum of lease terms before the visitation. So we had the Coors announcement, we had the memorandum of lease terms, and we were short on the $100 million. So I did something which everybody laughed at me for, but it got me there. I put a part of the Coors sponsorship, the naming rights money, and called it non-equity equity, or something like that in the partnership. So we made the $100 million, but part of it was really sponsorship dollars. And the league, they picked up on it right away. They're not, but they let it go. They let it go because they thought, we had enough money to do the deal at that point.
So the other deals, were they just right at $100 million, or were they bringing more than $100 million to the table?
Well, like Miami, of course, Huizenga was going to finance himself or pay for himself all the startup costs of the business, which were significant, and I'll get into that in a little bit. But in any event, so before, one of the other things I did was before the visitation on March 26th, I called my friend Phyllis Collins. And I said, Phyllis, how's everybody getting there? And she said, well, we're all going to go on Mr. Wilpon's plane. I said, if I put together a book, a notebook, will you distribute them on the plane so that they can read what we've accomplished in the last week or so on the way out? And she said, yeah, I'll do that. So I put together a book, which is one of the things that I have. And, they had 3 hours or whatever it takes to fly a 750-mile-an-hour jet out here from New York. And they read it. I mean, they all looked at it. And I had the summary of the lease, which at that point was the best lease in baseball for any team. No question about it. I mean, what we did there was the right thing. And we took our best asset and we leveraged it to say, God, this team can be successful. Look at the lease that they've got. Because when you get down to it on all these deals, Neil, you know this well, it's all about the economics and it's all about the money. And are you going to be successful? And the lease helped us to be successful right off the bat. So they read that. The other thing they told us was, we don't want any public demonstrations. Here's our routine. We've sent them an itinerary. And I'm still playing like, I'm an underdog in this thing. There was articles in the paper that says we're 1,000,000 to 1 or whatever. Nobody gave us a chance. So I'm still playing underdog. So I said, okay, we're going to have a public demonstration. And I don't know whether you were in the atrium of the...
Was it the Colorado Bank building or
it's now the Wells Fargo.
It was
I forget what it was called then.
It
was the old U.S. Bank. It was the atrium between 1700 Broadway and 1700 Lincoln. And Roger Kinney, who was the first employee of the Rockies, I said, Roger, you can get this organized better than anybody else. Go get it done. And they had landed at Combs Gates out at Old Stapleton, and we had helicopters that we had gotten from the TV stations, I think the police department or whatever, and we all piled into these helicopters. And we flew from there to take a tour of the site where the stadium was going to be built, and then we were going to land in Mile High, which was the city had set up for baseball. And if you go back and look at the weather reports, March 26, 1991 was a gorgeous day in Denver. It was a postcard day. When we were up in the helicopters, you could see from Pikes Peak to Longs Peak. It was that clear and just beautiful. And I remember we flew over East High School, and I didn't know everything that Roger had done, but the kids, East High had formed a baseball out on one of the fields with the seams, and they were all, it was a big, big baseball, and we could see that from the air. And then we flew over the site where the stadium was going to be built, and we had it chalked out as to where the stadium was going to be in relation to downtown Denver. And then we landed in Mile High Stadium, which was, the stands had been moved. Remember that we had the movable stands.
Right.
They had been set up for baseball. And, the scoreboard was lit up, said, 100 days to opening day, or whatever it happened to be. And the field was beautiful, because one of the things, we knew that the stadium wasn't going to be done until '95, and we had 2 years to play at another location, and I was totally concerned about that. I didn't know whether Mile High was going to be acceptable. I'm worried about everything at this point. I'm trying to cover all the details. And one of the funny things that happened, I was standing on the mound, and Bill White goes like this to me. He says, "Come over here." And I said, "What's up, Bill?" He said, "I played here." And I said, I didn't know that. He said, "Yeah, when I was in the minor leagues," he said, I played in Denver. And he points to the left field wall, and he says to me, "Not 339. And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Closer to 319. I had the city change the distance because I was so concerned that it was going to look like a bandbox. So I had them change it from 319 to 339.
Wow.
And Bill White picked up on that.
That's incredible.
And I said, "Bill, I don't have any idea what you're talking about." And he just laughed. He just laughed, and we've kept that between us for a long time. And then we had lunch at the governor's mansion, and I remember Governor Sullivan came down from Wyoming for that, and made a speech about how this would be a regional team, and that's the play that we had. Our whole theme was time zone without a team. There's a tape on that. Have you ever seen that? The
we put it together. The baseball commission put it together.
Did you put it together?
Yes.
I still have one of those.
Oh, do you?
Yeah, I still have one of those. Anyway, that was a great thing that we did, and we're still the only team in the time zone, right? I mean, even though Arizona, it's kind of not in the time.
Half of the time.
It's half of the time. Half of the time it is.
They're in, it's like
I never
us,
could
yeah.
figure that out.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we had lunch, and then we got in buses, and we were going to go to our office to have the business meeting. And instead of going to 7000 Lincoln, I took them around to Broadway, where there was, I don't know how many people there were in the atrium, but it was well over 2,000 people. And Roger had a band, and we walked in, and there was a crush of people. I mean, it was very, very, and we walked in, and they started singing "Take Me Out to the Ball Game." And I had, because it was so crowded and people were so amped up about this, I had Phyllis by the hand and was guiding her in. And people started singing "Take Me Out to the Ball Game." And I looked at Phyllis. By this time, Bill Giles was on the committee. And again, I can't remember who the guy was that he replaced. But anyway, I look at Phyllis, and tears are streaming down her face. And I look at Bill Giles, whose family had been in baseball forever. I think his father was president of the National League and the Phillies. He's crying. I mean, it was a very emotional thing. And we announced that we had sold, 23,000 season tickets and everything else. And then we went up the escalators, and we went we went to get ready for the business meeting, which was in one of Home Robert's biggest conference rooms. First we had a break, and I'm in the men's room, and Fred Wilpon comes up to me. And Fred is not a tall guy. I mean, he comes up to me about here, okay? He takes his finger and he puts it in my chest and he says, "We told you no public demonstrations," like that. And I didn't know what to say. He caught me by surprise, and I didn't know what to say. And before I could say anything, he said, "That was the smartest thing anybody did in this whole process." He said,
wow.
that was really, really good. And that set the tone for the meeting. We go into the meeting, and Bill Giles, who had read the stuff I'd put on the airplane, he said, "This is the best lease I've ever seen."
I'm sure he did.
Yeah, I'm sure he did. He said, "I can't get this done in Philadelphia. You want to come to Philadelphia?" Anyway, it started out, it was just like the meeting in New York, where all of a sudden it got very informal, and I'm sitting there listening to the questions that they're asking ownership. And it isn't about what you have to do to get the franchise. There were questions like, where are you going to do spring training? There were questions about, like, you're really far down the line here. These are operational questions that we're now asking you. And I picked up on that right away and thought we had a really good chance. Anyway, the meeting went well, broke up. They had a press conference, and then we got on buses and went back to Stapleton. I was on one bus with most of the members of the committee and Bill White. And a lot of the businesses in town, Roger had arranged, we gave them Stetson hats from Miller Stockman and a Fielder book on Colorado. And it was a very happy ride back to the plane. Again, this isn't anywhere, but this was March, so it was spring training time. And everybody was going back to New York except Bill Giles. He was going to go to Florida. And so he was going to go on Mr. Monas's plane with Monas back to Florida. So he was by himself for a while sitting on the plane. I knew that, and I went, after we dropped everybody off, I went to the Monas plane, and I sat with him for a little while. And he said, before I came out here, and I don't know how to say this delicately, but he had found the cabinet with the bottles in it, okay? And he had had a little bit too much to drink by the time he was talking to me. And he wasn't drunk or anything like that, but he was in a very good mood, let me put it that way. And he said, before I came down here, he said it was two Florida teams. It was Miami and Tampa, St. Pete. He said, but I got to tell you, he said, I'm real impressed. He said, you guys got my vote. So I knew we had made some good progress there. This was about 5:30, 6 o'clock in March. And I went back, and I watched everybody take off, and I went back into the Combs Gates waiting room or whatever, lounge. And I sat there, and I realized I was just drained. I was drained from the day. And I sat there for about a half an hour, maybe even longer, and I had a Coke or something. And I walked out to my car. And as I put the key in the door, well, we didn't have those things in those days, right? As I put the key in the door, it started to snow.
Wow,
Late
that's
in the
Colorado.
day. That was Colorado. And I said to myself, if they'd have come the next day, it would have been so different. Because one of the things that we fought all the way through this was, your weather out there, it's always snowing, it's always cold and everything like that.
Right.
The facts don't support that. The fact was we had less snow days or rain days and rain out than most of the other major league teams did. But they didn't perceive it that way, because all those guys ever did was fly over Denver to go to Aspen or Vail or whatever, where it was always snow in March, right? So I just said, boy, are we lucky that it wasn't the next day. And then I started to believe that this is meant to be. And it was that day that I said, this is going to happen. We can make this happen. So they went back, and that was March, and Bill called me the next day and said, the meetings were good, you know, this will get decided probably in June at the owners' meeting in, I think it was in Arizona, I think it was in Scottsdale. So great, so it was from that point on that we started putting together the real ownership documents and partnership agreements, and finally got to do some legal work instead of some PR work, and we put together an organization where Monas and Antonucci were the general partners. I had gotten a call in March from Bill, again, off the record, saying, there's a member of your group that can't be in the group. And I said, okay, you want to give me a little clue about who that might be? And he said, well, no, I'm not going to give you a lot of clues, but I think it may be the first guy that you met. So he said, you need to disappear him. And he was talking about Mike Nicholas. And they had done an investigation of everybody, you know, from a security,
wow.
I mean, they went into everybody's backgrounds and who was who, and, you know, what their connections were. And he never really told me what the problem was, but I knew I had to get it done. So it was right before the March meeting when they came out here. I flew down to Florida, and Mike was playing in the Farmore golf tournament. I remember going out in a golf cart, meeting him, and saying, Mike, here's your $100,000 back, but you can't play in this game. And and he said, why? And I said, I can't tell you. I said, I can't tell you because I really don't know, but you know, you're not acceptable to baseball. And he wasn't happy about it. I later had to go back to New York and meet with his lawyer. And by that time, I had some more facts. Baseball gave me a few more facts, and we had a conversation, and he dropped out. So he was never really a part of what went forward, and that was the reason why. So from March until June, we put everything together in a partnership forum, and got the deal done between the limiteds and the general.
So when Mike had to depart from the group, then did that leave a hole of some additional money that you had to raise, or you were in good shape by that point?
No, we were in good shape by that point.
Okay.
It was right before we did the Coors deal, so I was able to cover what he was going to put in, because my gut was right that, you know, he may have had $2 or $3 million and he wanted to be the general partner, like you've seen in real estate deals before, and use everybody else's money and have control. That wasn't going to happen with this group.
So who was in the original ownership group?
I wish I had my notes here in front of me, but the original ownership group was Jerry McMorris, Charlie Monfort, Orrin Benton, Kerry Taraji. Remember Kerry Taraji?
Yes.
Well, you know, he had a rival group. He was, remember I said there were 18 groups from 10 different cities? Well, Denver actually had 2 applications submitted. And the governor came to me one day and said, look, I can't go back to New York and support 2 groups. You better figure out a way to fold Taraji into your group, because you're going to have the stronger group. And Kerry was good about it. I mean, he became part of the general partner group, and then later had to leave for some other reason. But we did fold those groups in. So he was one of the originals. The Rocky Mountain News was in there.
Linda Alvarado.
Yeah, I brought Linda in. Linda had been a client of mine for a long time. Linda,
KOA was in there?
KOA was in there.
And
Beverage Distributors was in there. I think that was about it. When I bring you down the books to look at, I'll you know, you can look at those and see. But that was the original group, and Monas and Antonucci were the general partners, because the same feeling was there. There was still a feeling that somehow that we weren't going to get it. We've been, you know, we've been put off so many times in this Major League Baseball process that nobody gave us a shot. But that was the original group, and Monas and Antonici were the general partners at that point. So that was March of, all of that took place, you know, on about the time of the visitation, and we waited. And then on June 5th, 1990, I got a call from Bill White. And Bill said, I'm going to tell you something that you can't tell anybody. I said, oh, thanks a lot.
Especially if it's really good, right?
Yeah. And he said the expansion committee is going to recommend to the owners that it's Denver and Miami, but you can't tell anybody. And I said, well, Bill, why can't I tell anybody? He says, because I got a couple problems. And I said, what are your problems? And this was right before the owners' meeting, I think, that they were going to have. He said, one of the problems is that Chicago, Mr. Reinsdorf, is really promoting Tampa St. Pete, because they built the stadium, and
Oh, yeah,
you know,
yeah.
and he
Right.
felt the guilt because
He'd led them down the
he
primrose path.
led them down the path, and they took the bait and they built this thing. That was one problem he had. And he said, we've got a problem with the allocation of money between the leagues. There had been a precedent where the expansion league would get a bigger percentage than than the owners in the American League. He said, so we're going to have to fight that out. He said, but I don't want you to tell anybody about this until, you know, we get that worked out.
But he must have felt pretty confident that
He-
it was
he-
still going to happen.
He was confident that it was still going to happen, but again, he's not in control, you know, and it was going to be an owner decision. And apparently the owners' meeting was not a happy meeting. And the reason I remember it was June 5th is because that's my birthday.
Happy birthday to you.
Yeah, so I knew that, and I didn't tell a soul. I didn't tell my wife. I didn't tell anybody.
Wow.
But at that point I was so, you know, excited about the prospect and where they were. I didn't tell a soul. And then they did get it worked out. They gave the American League more of the money than previously, and I don't know what other trade-offs were there. But we were told that there would be an owners' meeting on July 5th of 1991 by telephone that we would all participate in, and there would be a vote at that time as to approving Miami and Denver. So they did. They hooked us in, and I called Bill and I said, Bill, you need to come to Denver for this. He said, I want you in Denver. He said, well, he said, I've already gotten a call from Wayne Huizenga. They want me in Miami. I don't care, Bill. I said, by this time, Bill and I were very close, and we're still close. I talk to him 2 or 3 times a year, and he's one of the greatest guys I've ever met. And so he said, okay, I'll be in Denver. So Bill White came to Denver on July 5th. We had the phone call. It was unanimous. And then they had the announcement, I think, at one of the hotels downtown. By this time, I was off the air.
10 foot taller than you are.
Yeah. I couldn't believe what we had accomplished and what so many people had contributed and gotten this thing done. And when you look back over the history of it, so that was what happened with the franchise. The other thing that I told you sometime during this point, I started to believe this was a meant to be, because so many things happened that was so unpredictable yet so good. And one of the things was we had to get somewhere between $30 and $40 million to operate for 2 years and set up a farm system, hire people, do all of these things. Where were we going to get that money? Because that wasn't in the equity. That was just not there. We were never going to raise that. So we had a loan commitment from, I think it was Citibank. I'm pretty sure it was Citibank. Citibank had a loan production office here, and I was working with a couple of guys to get a commitment. Well, we got a commitment, and it was that thick. And it was the most onerous loan commitment I've ever read in my entire career. And I wasn't happy about it. We went back to New York sometime in maybe March or April of '91 to see if we had a deal. Because if we got this thing, we needed to have that money. And we had a nice lunch at Citibank, and they had a guy there who I later dubbed the Undertaker, because the way he was asking questions, I didn't get a good feel. And I mean, they wanted our firstborns, they wanted everything. I mean, it was just an awful commitment. And we walked out of there, and I turned to Antonucci was with us, Steve Kurtz was with us, and I turned to them and I said, guys, I just don't feel good about this. I said, we may get this loan, I said, but I don't want this loan. And I said, look, as long as we've got some time in New York, we weren't leaving until the next day, let's go talk to a couple of other banks that we hadn't even talked to. And I looked up, and there was this big red number 9 on a building, and it said 9 West 40-something Street or something like that. And it said J.P. Morgan. I said, let's go over and talk to J.P. Morgan. So we walked into J.P. Morgan. This was the private bank. And we walked in there, and in the lobby was a guy that, it was Marn Oberauer, who was Beverage Distributors, who Antonucci knew, and who became part of the ownership group anyway. And he was talking to a banker. And so somebody we knew, so we went over and talked to him, and he introduced us to this banker whose name is Scott Nickham. Do you know Scott?
No.
Okay, I'll tell you that story. So I said, they said, why are you here? And I said, well, we're doing this, and we just went over to Citibank, and Scott said, well, we'll take a look at that. He said, we just we're part of the consortium that loaned Major League Baseball $1 million, and one of our analysts, a kid named Ken Dale, I'll never forget this kid. He was maybe 27, 28 years old. He said, this kid knows more about the economics of Major League Baseball than anybody, because he did all the analysis on the MLB loan. That was a Thursday. It was a Thursday afternoon. And Scott said, can you stay a couple of days and work with Ken and see if there's anything here? So Steve Kurtz and I stayed. Antonucci had to leave for whatever reason. Steve and I stayed. And we worked with this guy, Ken Dale, who, and we showed him projections that we'd never shown to anybody before. We were so confident that we were going to do over $4 million the first year that we were afraid to show them to anybody because nobody would believe them.
Right.
And but we had the numbers, and we could back it up. Anyway, we sat with him on Tuesday, following Tuesday. We stayed the weekend. We had like an 8-page loan commitment that was reasonable. They took it to the loan committee. It got approved on that Tuesday, and we walked out of there in 4 days with a loan commitment.
Wow.
For $40 million. I mean, and it was a good deal. I mean, it was good for the bank, but it was good. It was good for us too, and it was reasonable, and didn't have all the other stuff in it that the other one had. When those kinds of things happen, when you walk into a bank that you've never been into before, from a real estate and just a business point of view, those things don't happen unless there's a higher force telling you to get this done. Anyway, Scott Nickham was very high in the private bank there. He then moved to Dallas and headed the private bank there, which included the Denver region. And for the last 20 years, he's been in Denver. He just retired, and he's one of my best friends. And he headed the Denver office of J.P. Morgan, now J.P. Morgan Chase. He headed the private bank. And, you know, he's just a great guy and great banker. And I don't know if you wanted to talk to him, he's around. He's around. But he played a very key role, because without that money, you know, we didn't know how we were going to get in. But everything started to come together pretty much all at the same time.
Well, that's one of the questions we were going to ask you. Paul is some other people we need to talk to. So can you spell his name for me?
Yeah, it's Scott, N-Y-C-U-M.
And he's still with Chase?
No, he just retired.
No.
But
Okay.
let me give you his phone number.
Don't worry about it right now.
We'll get it later.
Yeah, I can give you his phone numbers, but he, did they mention him in the article at all? I don't know whether they did or not, but anyway, he played a key role in all of this. So we're at, you know, July of '91, we get the franchise. We subleased some space from Home Roberts in the 1700 Broadway building, and opened an office and started to go around and hire people. We knew we had to hire a general manager, and I think that was in, I think we went to the September owners meetings in Baltimore, and we interviewed several people there for being general manager, and ultimately hired Bob Gebhardt, who had been with Minnesota, and we had interviewed a bunch of other people as well, but made the decision to hire Bob, and we started hiring ticket people. And what's amazing to me is that a number of the people that we hired are still there today. I mean, Sue Ann McLaren is still running tickets. She was with the Cardinals. We hired a chief accountant who's still there today. The head of personnel is still there today.
Really?
There's
Wow.
probably 20 to 25 people in key positions that are still there today. And I feel really good about that, because we made careers for them. I mean, you know, and it's been such a success, partly because of what they contributed as well, but it's very, very gratifying to see that.
Well, it's probably very gratifying that you've been able to see the numbers that the Rockies pulled in the early days, and all of those things that absolutely made your projections spot on.
Yeah, I mean,
right.
we knew we had a stadium that was going to seat, you know, 60 to 70,000 people, and you know, it just turned out, and the opening day crowd was, you were there, I'm sure, and it was electric. You know what my biggest problem was on opening day?
What was that?
I thought that the stands that we put up in center field were going to fall down. I was so afraid of that. I mean, we put up those temporary stands behind the, you know, in that corner where and I'm sitting on the first base side, and I'm watching these things go like this, and I was, you know, panicked that something bad was going to happen. But, you know, it's a beautiful day. I went to New York for the opening game in New York, which was very exciting. The first game was very, very exciting. And then we opened here. And
So you had a little problem with Monas in between.
yeah, I can talk about that. Monas, I was, that morning, and this isn't anywhere, John Antonucci called me, this was in July of, I think, 92, right? I forget the exact date, but it was in July of 92. And John had told me a week before, he said, look, will you go back with me to Youngstown? I want to talk to Mickey about, they had a lot of small businesses that they were involved in together. Battery One Stop was one of them. There were a whole bunch of them. He said, we're just going to divide up and separate our interests. will you go back? I said, John, that's not my job. I said, I'm general counsel of the team. I said, he said, just come back with me and listen. So I said, finally I said, okay, I'll go back with you. So that morning, I went to pick him up at his house. And he had already moved to Denver, and I went to pick him up. And we had like an 8 o'clock plane out of Stapleton. So I picked him up I was supposed to pick him up like 6:15 or something like that, whatever the time was. And I'm waiting outside the house because I didn't, he usually was very prompt in coming out, and he didn't come out. I waited 15 minutes and he didn't come out. So I finally went up and rang the doorbell, woke everybody up at his house. He had 3 kids, and John comes to the door in his pajamas. And I said, John, we got to go. He said, we're not going. I said, why? He said, I've been up all night. I said, doing what? He said, talking. And he says, talking to Mickey. And I said, about what? And he said, I don't know what we were talking about, but Mickey's got a problem. And he's coming to Denver today. And I said, well, what did you talk about for 7 hours all night? Because clearly he'd been up all night, and I could tell by looking at him. I said, what did you talk about? He said, he never got real specific with me. He just said he's got a problem at Farmore and he needs to come to Denver. So I said, okay. And so my antenna was really elevated. So we went to the office, and Mickey came in with a friend of his who I don't remember his name, but I had met him once before, but he was a good friend of Mickey's, and he had accompanied Mickey to Denver. I took one look at Mickey, and I said, there's a real problem here, because this guy clearly hadn't slept in days, and his eyes were, and he needed a shave, and he was disheveled, and he wasn't making sense in some of the stuff he was talking about. So John Antonucci was in the room, I was in the room, Steve Kurtz was there just because he happened to be there, and I don't remember if there was anybody else, and Mickey and his friend. And Mickey starts the conversation by saying, I'm no longer acceptable to baseball. That's a quote. And I didn't know what was coming, and I didn't know what he was talking about at that point. And I said, Mickey, shut up. I said, this is not a privileged conversation. I'm not your lawyer. I don't know what you're going to say, but I want you to talk to a lawyer before you say any more. So I got him a lawyer. And I knew just by looking at him that I was never going to see this guy again. I just knew I had the feeling, and so I got him a criminal lawyer because I had a sense that something was really wrong. And he met with this lawyer for half an hour or so, and he comes out of the room and he says, same thing he said, I can't give you any details, but I will tell you that I'm not acceptable to baseball, but I don't want to hurt the team. I don't want to hurt the effort. I got to sell my interest. So I said, okay. I said, I'll buy it. And Steve Kurtz and I said, we'll buy it right now. What do you want? And he said, all I want is, they had borrowed money from a vulture fund in New York. I can't remember the name of it. He said, all I want is my money back, which was $20 million. I said, fine, we'll pay you $20 million. No, I don't have $20 million, in case you didn't know that, neither did Steve. So
Not even on your MasterCard line of credit?
No, the MasterCard wouldn't cover it, the American Express wouldn't cover it. So I hand wrote a contract that we would buy him. We gave him $10,000 down and a promise to pay him $19,990,000 in 90 days. I had no idea how I was going to do that, but I knew I had to get control of his interest. Just my gut, So we did that, and he signed the contract. And I said to him, I said, Mickey, if you want a lawyer, I'll get you a lawyer. He said, no, just, he said, I can read these things, and he signed it. And we took a present assignment right there at his interest, of $20 million. So I owned most of the general partner at that point. He said, you got to take my father out too, because his father was in that same loan, Nathan. And I said, well, where's your dad? And he said, well, this was July of '92. He says, well, he's on a yacht outside of Barcelona at the Olympics. Remember the '92 Olympics were in Barcelona? And he said, here's the telephone number where you can get him. And so I called him, and it was the middle of the night there, of course, and we woke him up. And I said, look, Mickey wants to talk to you alone. And then, you know, so Mickey talked to him alone, and then Mickey called me in, and he said, here, talk to my dad and just do the same deal with him. So there was no email in those days, and so we were faxing documents back and forth to some yacht off the coast of Barcelona. And so we acquired his interest as well. He was included in that $20 million. It was all part of the same deal. But we got it done that night, that afternoon in Denver. And I took Mickey back to the airport after that and drove him to the airport. And I said, where are you going? He said, well, I'm going back to Cleveland, and I'll be at this hotel staying. What I didn't know at the time, and why he came out, and what he knew that he didn't tell anybody when he was there, but I found out within the next couple of days, was that the CFO of the company that day was going to the FBI in Cleveland because to spill his guts and to tell him what the fraud was and that there was a big problem at Farmwell. So Mickey had to do something really quick, so he got out of town and came to Denver and everything like that. And that weekend, that was, I think that was a Thursday, and it was a Thursday, and that weekend the FBI came in and raided Farmore and took all the books and records and everything. In the meantime, on that next day, Friday, I called the league, the commissioner, who at that time was Fay Vincent, and Bill White, told him what had happened, what I had done, and I called J.P. Morgan and told them, and Scott launched an investigation right away and through his financial networks, and I mean, they were as shocked as anybody because, you know, they had loaned him $300 million or some ridiculous amount, and they had started to hear rumblings that there were problems at Farmore. The commissioner said, you come back here on Monday and let's talk about this. So Steve and I don't think for some reason Antonucci did go to that meeting, and then he had to leave to go somewhere else. We met at the commissioner's office with the commissioner and then Bill White and everything. And they said, well, wait a minute, you already solved our problem, right? He's gone, right? And you own his interest, right? I said, yeah, I own his interest. I said, fine, well, you know, fill out an application to be owners and you'll be accepted. So I said, well, there's one little problem. I don't have the rest of the $20 million. I said, but I will see what I can do to raise the money. So that was in July, and between July and September, talked to a lot of other people in Denver, and came close with one, Bill Daniels. But he was involved in a major transaction himself, and he just said, guys, if this were 6 months from now, I would do it. But he couldn't because he was selling something called Prime Ticket, and he was all tied up, and he just couldn't do it.
Right.
So that's when McMorris, Benton, and Montfort, Charlie, got together and said that they would cover the $20 million. And
So how much more complicated would this have been, Paul, had you not negotiated the sign over of that interest on that night? What would have been the consequences if he would have been indicted prior to any
I think there was a
transfer?
significant chance that we would have lost the team, that they would have gone to Tampa, because we still had the American League out there still,
Right.
Matt. And the interesting thing is, we hadn't closed on the franchise yet. I was negotiating the membership agreement with the league at the time, and the money was up in letters of credit, but we hadn't closed. And the reason we hadn't closed is because baseball is on a fiscal year that ends October 31. So the owners didn't want the money until November. So we were in a state of flux, and it would have been real easy to jerk the franchise and go somewhere else. And I think, I don't know that it would have happened, but I think there was a significant chance that it would have happened. Because, what they were always concerned about was the stability of the ownership. And, and baseball didn't pick up on this either. I mean, they had investigated everybody and didn't have a clue. I always said this was one of the first, billion-dollar frauds in history. Mickey was way ahead of his time. I mean, Enron and all those others
Yes,
came
yeah.
way after that. Mickey was a thought leader in this deal, and it was a very complicated fraud.
And so what happened to Mickey?
He went to jail for 18 years.
Wow.
The reason that it was so long, and I sat through some of the trial back in Youngstown and Cleveland. There was a bankruptcy hearing in Youngstown. I think the trial was in Cleveland. Anyway, during this interesting story, during the trial, every day there were 6 or 7 very big men sitting in the courtroom. And it turns out that they were football players at Youngstown State that Mickey was friendly with. And they threatened a juror in a federal court. And they threatened a woman who was on the jury and told her that if she didn't vote for acquittal, that they were going to get her and her daughter. And the woman, I don't remember what happened, whether she voted no and then changed her mind, or she went, but anyway, at some point she went to the feds and said, look, this is what's happening. And so Mickey tried to bribe the jury, and that's why they threw the keys away. I mean, they put him into, you don't do that, particularly in a federal court.
Right.
And so he didn't get early release or anything like that. He served almost 18 years in jail.
Wow.
So it seems to me that it wasn't long after that Antonucci exited also. What precipitated his exit?
Yeah. After that, John when I sold, and I just to make a point, I gave my interest to Bonfoot, McMorris, and Benton.
A direct dollar-for-dollar transfer.
I didn't, yeah, they gave me my $10,000 back.
Right.
But I didn't make any money on this deal. I was just concerned that we didn't lose the franchise. And when I couldn't put a deal together with anybody else, and these guys said, look, we'll do it. And at that point, I trusted McMorris. And so I just gave it to him. I just assigned it to him September 1, I think it was. I gave it to him and said, here you go. And then McMorris was in charge, and he didn't want, how do I say this the nicest way, he didn't want anybody around that had been involved originally, okay? He didn't want me around, he didn't want Antonucci around, he didn't want Earhart around. He was the guy who brought baseball to them. And it was,
This is McMorris?
That was in his head.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So, you know, he eventually bought John out and did a funny deal with Earhart. He was going to manage Coors Field, and then he got rid of him. And then there were 2 or 3 things that I was working on, but it was clear to me that after I got those done, I was going to leave. I mean, it was clear. So, yeah. And I will say this about John. I mean, John Antonucci was never charged with anything, never did anything wrong. He was a shareholder in Farmore, but ironically, because his beverage company sold liquor to Farmore, that he couldn't be involved in the management of Farmore just under the liquor laws, where you can't have a retailer and a wholesaler.
Right.
So he was never involved in that, and to this day, I believe that he never knew what was going on in Farmore. And it was a complicated fraud. I mean, there's some guys from Pete Marwick who went to jail, where Mickey had co-opted the accountants and everything. And what they were doing was moving inventory from one store to another, counting it 10 times in terms of the assets of the company. And a bunch of people went to jail.
Interesting.
So do you still have a relationship with the ownership group at the Rockies? And
after Jerry McMorris was bought out, I have a very good relationship with the Montforts. I always had a good relationship with Charlie. And then, you know, Dick wasn't involved in the beginning. And then, you know, when Jerry had to sell his interest in the trucking company's interest, I think Dick bought that, and then he bought out Montfort. And then, because of some of Charlie's personal problems, he was actually kind of forced to take over. And I met with him 2 or 3 years ago, told him a lot of what I'm telling you, which he had no idea about.
Really?
And we have a very good relationship.
So how did you feel on opening day at Mile High Stadium?
I felt like, my God, is this really happening? You know, it was, you know, it's like when you go elephant hunting, every now and then you shoot an elephant. It was that kind of a feeling that, you know, my God, you know, look what we did. It was, opening day was phenomenal. I felt the same thing in New York, though, just to see the team run out on the field that said Colorado on it. That was
Right.
That was amazing to me. That was amazing to me. It was quite a thrill. So, and there were a lot of other things that happened in the course of it. You know, the McHale hiring was a big issue with me. That was something that, you remember there was an Attorney General's investigation on that, and rightfully so. And they said there was no problem with it. Tim Tinkovich was the guy. He's now on the Court of Appeals, I think, Federal Court of Appeals. That was a real problem for me. I was very against that. Had conversations with the governor, and the governor was against it too, and said don't do it. And Antonucci just went and hired John. It was fine, but I knew it was going to cause a stir. I mean, I just knew you don't do that. But he wanted John to be involved, and John wanted to be involved, and it's fine.
well, I think Neil and I have always felt that, you know, this was a major accomplishment, and that it was very much a relay race. And if anybody would have dropped the baton during their particular piece of it, we wouldn't enjoy what we enjoyed today.
No, I think that's right. I think that's right.
And I have to say, John, your story is absolutely incredible. I think it's one of the best that we have absolutely heard.
It's been incredible.
And, you know, it's very obvious, you're a very well-organized, smart attorney, that you have a great way of putting the story forward in a very organized way, so thank you.
You're welcome. It became my life. I mean, and certainly once we made the short list, and I knew we had a chance. I mean, a lot of this I was just fronting myself. The firm, Home Roberts, was great. You know, I didn't have a client. I was building a client.
Right.
Nobody was paying me.
Right.
Yeah,
You know, and I just said to the firm, I said, look, I think I can get this done. If I get done, we'll get paid. If I don't get done, we're not gonna get paid. And they said, go for it. So there were a lot of things that happened on the way through that was so serendipitous. It's just things that, you know, like the loan, you know, like Bill White having confidence in me, like my relationship with Phyllis. It all just came together.
Right.
And I knew when he called, I don't know whether you were in the room when I said, I knew on June 5th when he called me and said, don't tell anybody. That was
Right.
my birthday.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Nice
And
birthday
how do these
present.
things
Nice
happen,
birthday
right?
present, yeah.
How do these things happen? So it was phenomenal. And Governor Romer, you know, he gave me his private cell phone number. If he was in the shower and I called him, because remember, he was running for re-election, I think, that year. And so he wanted this to happen. You know, it was an amazing year.
So how long did you work on this without having a paycheck from
Well, certainly
from a client? Yeah.
From August, when we first went to the meetings, until, you know, Monis and Antonucci had committed to put in money. So I would say maybe August till October, maybe November, when we started to get some money in from the people who ultimately came. That's how I got paid. I got paid.
Well,
And
it
then-
is.
And we
it is a-
closed the loan, and there was money there for
Right.
that, as well as paying other people.
Right.
So,
Wow, what an incredible story.
So besides Scott Nickum, are there some other folks that you think we should be sure to make sure that we circle back around with? And
well, you can call, I mean, some of the people that contributed the article, I mean, you can call Bill White. He'll talk to you.
really?
Yeah.
Oh, that'd be great.
Yeah.
He and I are pretty close.
Where is he now?
Upper Black Eddy, Pennsylvania.
Okay.
And I can get you,
Okay,
I can get you
contact
his number.
information.
But I think Bill White, and then the other guy is a guy named Bob Keel. Keel was lawyer for the National League at the time, and he and I have remained friends throughout this process. But they were the ones. Phyllis is a little old to talk to right now. She won't say very much. I'm not sure how much she remembers, but she's in her upper 80s now. And but Bill is. I talked to him 2 weeks ago. He's vibrant, and you know. And then when they did it, when Bud came in and they reorganized the leagues and they eliminated the league presidents. Bill White, who was a great baseball player, and you know, he used to be an announcer for the Yankees, and then he became, you know, the first black league president that they ever had. He's very much alive, but he hasn't been to a baseball game in more than 20 years. He's so soured on
that's a
how they
shame.
got rid of him. I mean,
Oh, really?
yeah.
Wow.
He says there's he told me the other day, he says, there's only 3 people that I talk to in baseball. He said, I still talk to Peter O'Malley, because Peter was one of his big supporters. And he doesn't own the Dodgers anymore. And he said, you and who was the pitcher from Philadelphia who lives in Colorado? Can't think of his name, but he's down in southwestern Colorado, living in a bunker waiting for the world to end with enough food to last him a lifetime. Bill
So
said-
that's what baseball does
There we
too.
go.
Yeah, Bill says he's a little crazy, but he's still a good guy. He said that's all he talks to. He doesn't
Really?
have much to
Isn't that
do with
interesting?
anybody else anymore.
Wow.
Yeah, this is a guy who baseball was his whole life.
Right. Huh.
That's probably when it hurts the most, is when you've given the most and you feel
Yeah,
betrayed.
I mean, after I got involved, is this thing still on?
Yeah. Maybe we should just wrap it up. Do you have any final thoughts?
Anything that
and-
we didn't ask
And
you
what-
that you'd like to
and
talk about?
did
No, we talked
Stadium
about-
have a positive impact on downtown and lower downtown?
Oh, come on. You know, I will tell you a story about why Coors Field is where Coors Field is. I mean, you know, there was a ULI study that recommended that site, but when we were out looking for money, you know, Mr. Anschutz owned where the Pepsi Center was.
Right.
And I talked to his representatives, and just to bring equity into the team, and what they want, you know, and I said, if you do that, you know, we'll put Coors Field where the Pepsi Center is now. And I was told that he wasn't interested in sports ventures at all. Well, and what's happened subsequently, he owns everything in the world, right? And he's involved in soccer, he's involved in basketball, lots of other things. But at the time, it wasn't the right place. So, I mean, Coors Field could have been where the Pepsi Center is, but Coors Field is in the right place. Absolutely the right place, because you still have to go over Spear Boulevard, you know, to get to the Pepsi Center. And I think the Pepsi Center is in the right place for what it does, and I think Coors Field is. I think Denver's done a marvelous job in where our venues are located. I mean, even I'll call it Mile High, is where it's, because it doesn't need to be downtown. You know what I mean? It's you know, 15 days a year, and that's what it's used for. And it needs to be off a little bit. It doesn't need to be sitting in the middle of downtown. So Coors Field is absolutely in the right place, and it's a very walkable ballpark. And look what it's done for the neighborhood. I mean, when I think about the first time I went down there, before we chalked the field out,
Right.
and it was a mud flat. I mean, the only building down there was the Chaffa building, and you know, none of this had been built. And the other interesting thing that happened in connection with Coors Field has to do with Federico. You know, the parking is all about, parking that's controlled by the club is basically behind the stadium, and it runs for almost a mile down the railroad tracks.
Right.
Well, we needed an overpass to get, we needed a ramp to get into that area. Who was Secretary of Transportation at the time? Our ex-mayor, Federico Pena, who played a key role in getting us that
Oh,
built.
really? Huh.
Yeah. I don't know what he did, but he got it built. He got the money allocated, and he got it built.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, and it was always his vision to build the Platte, you know, build up the Platte Valley.
Right.
Look what's there now. We just moved our offices to right behind Union Station.
Right.
The first time I drove down there, I couldn't believe what's there. It's a whole new city.
Oh, yeah, totally.
It was incredible. It's incredible. So
which building are you in?
we're in Union Tower West,
Okay.
which is right behind Union
Right.
Station.
Right.
But I was blown away by what was
Oh, no, it's incredible what's gone on down
Yeah,
there.
yeah.
Unbelievable.
Well, and even opening day every day is still that same spirit. I mean, the stadium is
Oh,
full
yeah.
and the streets are full and,
No question about it, no question about it. And now you have a population that lives in that neighborhood, which is, you know, which is the best. It just isn't a destination kind of thing, so.
Exactly.
it's-
so what do you think about the party deck?
I think it was a brilliant idea. You know, you took the rooftops from Chicago and you moved it into the stadium.
Right.
I don't know what some of the bar owners down there think about it, but I think it's a terrific idea because, you know, the stadium was originally designed at about 43,000. And after, you know, after the 2 big years at Mile High, Jerry was convinced that we had to expand the stadium. I was against it. I said, Jerry, here are the numbers. I said, you got a 3 to 5 year honeymoon here. He said, but afterwards, filling those seats is going to depend upon winning. I mean, you just look at it, it's the same way everywhere. I said, you don't need a 50,000. You want to keep the numbers lower because then you'll be able to keep your ticket prices higher, the demand will be higher. No, he wanted to expand it, and he did, which is fine. So now, you know, reality set in, so we took 3,000 seats out, built a party deck, which is immensely successful. You know, sometimes when you look around the stadium, like on a Monday night, and some of the stands aren't filled, that place is filled.
Right.
Exactly.
And now, who could have predicted that we'd have all of these millenniums here, that,
Right.
that that's what they want and that kind of stuff. But it's, I think it's brilliant.
But have you interviewed any of those people up in the party deck? Most of them don't know what inning it is and which
Right.
teams are playing and what
Well,
the
you can
score
hardly
is.
see the game. That isn't the purpose.
Right.
That isn't the purpose. Yeah, no, I hear you. I hear you.
Well, it's the social aspect, I
Yeah,
think, of the game.
It's an entertainment event. It's a place to
Right.
go.
Right.
It's like going up on that rooftop of the bar that's close to there, where it's always packed. I can't even.
View house?
Yeah, the view house. I mean,
Yeah.
it's like being up there. So it's tremendously successful, and you're going to see changes in ballparks and how they're built. I just finished one in El Paso, Texas, believe it or not, where they have a AAA team now. El Paso Chihuahuas. You probably haven't been to one of their games, but in any event, down where we have the really good seats, like behind the dugout and everything, some of these places now put little tables and chairs. It's like you can have your cocktail down there. It's like a club area down close to the field. You're going to see lots of changes in how ballparks are built and what's important to people, electronics and those kinds of things. But the Rockies have done an unbelievable job in maintaining Coors Field. There are ballparks that are newer that I've been to that aren't as nice as Coors Field. Now, there's some upgrades that are needed, and they just did a deal with the district to extend the lease and see what happens. But I mean, the restrooms now are getting a little older. The club seat concept, people don't like to sit. The club seat concept has not been successful the last 10 years, where it was the big thing when we built that ballpark.
Right.
So the Rockies have done a lot of good things. They do a lot of conference room space. They have banquets up there. They made some of them visible. I mean, it's just things that happen.
Right.
Got to keep
Right.
up with the times.
Well, that was fantastic.
It was.
Just total.
Yeah.
And, I think another thing, when I look at, especially young people that go to the games and whatever, I don't think they have any clue whatsoever what kind of an effort Denver made in order to make this happen.
Remember, it's 25 years ago. Most of the young people weren't even born.
Right, right.
Right.
They
And it's
think
such a
it's
great
always
story.
been. They think it's always been. They think it's always been there.
Yeah.
And so it's, and there's no way that this franchise ever leaves here. It's still, the region keeps getting bigger and bigger, more
Right.
and more people. So you're going to have a successful franchise here for a long, long time.
Right.
I mean, I don't see Salt Lake or anybody else competing with us for a long, long time.
Well,
Great.
thanks for all you do
Sure.
on it, Paul.
Thank you, Paul. That was
Yeah, well,
fabulous.